Great, thanks. So, sorry if anyone missed the notes. That's what we're working from today. So we'll do our quick intros here, and then we'll jump into this conversation around Elizabeth Webbing. So I'm Stephanie Cavino from the Blackstone Collaborative, and I'm sorry that I got a cold over the weekend, so I'm constantly clearing my throat. But I'll hand it to John.
John O'Brien from the Nature Conservancy.
Thanks. Jess?
Yeah, hi everyone. Oh, sorry, Stephanie, I've got a cold too. So I'm Nancy Antonis and I'm with Railway Power.
Thanks. Our other John.
Morning, everyone. I'm John Moslin. I'm president of the Blackstone River Watershed Council.
Thanks, Kevin.
Morning, everyone. Kevin Rice, Finance and Program Manager for the.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, Sean Fussin O'Neill. I also have a cold, so I'm probably will be clearing my throat. I don't know, Stephanie. You and I might have a competition, so
Yeah, thanks. It's going around. Eric.
Morning, everyone. Eric Bright-Kreutz, and I'm superintendent of Blackstone River Valley National Historical Park.
Thanks, Eric. G. Allen. I'm sorry, I don't have your first name.
Greg Allen.
Greg. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, he's on our team. Just
Okay.
yeah, open it up. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I'm Greg Allen with Verdantis, and I must have missed the option to state my name when I joined.
That's okay.
So,
Thanks, Greg. Matt.
Morning, everybody. Matt Gendron with DEM Fish and Wildlife.
Thanks. Jason.
Morning, everybody. Jason McNamee, Deputy Director at Rhode Island DEM.
Thanks. And Darcy.
Good morning, everybody. Darcy Young with the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program.
Thanks. Great. Okay. So, excuse me, we have our notes. So like I said, we compiled this over various questions that CAC members had. And we had a conversation last week with the sort of internal Fish Passage Advisory team and talked these over. I think the big sort of driving question behind this was, what about full removal? And we'd heard that a 5-foot removal was sort of a proxy for full removal. But when we'd been out to the site, we said, well, it does really look higher than 5 feet of constructed dam. So what does that mean? The ledge at different points of the dam is at different heights. So is there still an opportunity for actual full removal, and what would that mean? And we had a conversation about creating a like a Nature Lake Fishway, more of like a rock ramp within the channel itself instead of using the raceway, and what that would look like. And so I think the kind of big picture change here is that we all agreed that it's really important to first understand what is the height of the dam and what is the height of the bedrock at different points so that we better understand that. And then number two is to do an overview analysis of what would it take to do a full removal with that knowledge, whatever that is, and as a sort of rock ramp fishway with potentially some weirs at the bottom so that during different flow scenarios, fish would still be able to get up. So if it's a low flow, they can go in this weir. If it's a higher flow, they can go in this weir. This is my very non biologist way of explaining this. So we would look at that and then do sort of a gut check at that point and say, okay, if this seems feasible, let's look down this path a bit more and figure out the specifics of what it would entail and what it would cost. But if the gut check says, no, in order to do this, you would have a half a mile of different fish weirs leading up to it to make sure that we had the room to get fish up, then it wouldn't be something we would necessarily pursue, and we would come back to where we are today. So maybe I'll hand it to um, John O'Brien to say a little bit more about that, or Sean.
Yeah, I'll just jump in.
Thanks.
I'd go back 10 years when DEM purchased that dam specifically for um, the purpose of removing it. There was great interest in, I think Army Corps was working on Main Street Slater Mill at the time. And so the current owner, who was developing condominiums in the mill, negotiated with DEM to take over the dam and the powerhouse. Unfortunately, at the last minute, he insisted on a covenant be placed um, on the deed, which restricted the amount of the dam that could actually be removed because of its, I don't know, they call it a noise screen or something. So DEM continued with the acquisition in order to take hydro off the table, bought the powerhouse and the dam. Um, and the there still is a problem with FERC. It still may be an option. FERC is a pretty poorly understood organization and some of the work that they do. But we're working very hard to make sure that it is not on the table. So there is an opportunity here, I think, to take a deeper look at it, take a look at the bedrock profile. And DEM and the core team was willing to take the risk that we may end up with the covenant that some negotiations with the owner may allow us to take a little bit off of it, but it may not be a situation where we can get a full dam removal and construction of a rock ram. So that's basically where we are. I've talked to Darcy about this, and I've reached out to Fuss and O'Neill. And the pathway forward would be for us to modify the current cooperative agreement or that we have with the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, and then go in and do an amendment to the current contract with Fuss and O'Neill to go forward and to look at, assuming the risks, full dam removal as an option, and the creation of a nature-like fishway below whatever needed to be done, depending upon the bedrock that remains. So that's currently where we are right now. I think I did talk with Sean about this at length, and Sean, I think you've looked at this and given this some thought, and maybe I'll turn it over to you to give us your thoughts on this option.
Yeah, thanks, John. So, yeah, John and I spoke, obviously after the CAC comments were received, and what we're going to do is we're going to essentially what we're driven by the scope here, right? By our contract with TNC, which at the time wasn't to do a full dam removal assessment. But what we talked about was kind of taking some of the budget for our phase 2 moving forward and basically allotting that towards spending time to actually look at a full removal. So basically to throw that in as another alternative here. So that's basically what we're going to do. So, what I'm going to do is take this report that we put together. Obviously, we're still receiving feedback, comments, whatever. And then this will basically be what we're going to call a phase 1 alternatives analysis, right? So phase 1, we'll be looking at the vertical slot fishway, the nature lake, and the bypass channel. With the alternatives that the various spillway lowering alternatives. And then phase 2 will be then looking at a full removal. And then so then we can ultimately make a final decision on a preferred alternative. So basically, we're looking at vertical slot nature like right now on the bypass channel with the varied spillway lowerings, but that's not what we're calling a final preferred alternative. It's just, we'll say a phase one alternative. So out of those options that we currently are looking at, what are we seeing as being the preferred? And then once we do a full removal, for instance, then we'll compare that to what we've currently done right now. So yeah, so that that's basically I think a summary of what we're looking to do. And what I'm gonna do, if you guys don't mind, I'm just gonna share my screen super fast. So what you can kind of see is I'll take, for instance, this next steps of our analysis. So, within this, we've updated this now. So again, all of this is going to be called phase one, for instance, alternatives assessment. Phase two, we're going to get spot elevations within the raceway channel. We're going to get river bottom elevations, which we're going to call ledge elevations. We'll say on the downstream side of the dam as part of phase two. That way we can get a better understanding, kind of like what Stephanie was saying earlier. What is the actual ledge elevations? Obviously, we know it's going to vary, but we're going to better capture that as part of phase two. We are going to run um, and a full removal alternative under this as part of the phase two assessment, so that then we can then compare what we've done today and then this full phase removal, and I can just, I can kind of show you what. Unfortunately, with the first phase that we did, this is kind of the results of an in-river survey that we essentially obtained, and that was from Roosevelt Ave. It includes bathymetry. You can see obviously the bathymetry in the river, the spot elevations. I know it's not a little tougher to see. Maybe if I select on one, they'll pop out a little bit. But then what happened is, because of at the time the survey was actually done, and we have channel bottom elevations on the upstream side of the dam, for instance, going down to elevation 25.1, we know the spillway crest is about 34. We we didn't have any data, excuse me, downstream of the dam itself, because at the time of the survey, I guess it was unsafe for the surveyor to get in there because of the whole turbulent flow situation. So that's the piece of information that we're looking to essentially, essentially get and update that to our survey so that we can better understand the ledge elevations that actually exist out there. I can tell you, this took a minute to do, and this is just a HEC-RAS model roughly, and this is the profiles that I've included are ABF, so aquatic base flow conditions, so kind of what you typically see out here in September and August. So this is current conditions with the dam in place. The elevation's about 34.52. Again, this is not a detailed analysis. I simply came in, took the dam completely out of there, right? And now you can kind of see what that does to the water surface profile. So, I mean, clearly, obviously, there's going to be a drop. We all know that. But, that's kind of what we're looking to further develop from now, getting information actually, on the downstream side here of the dam itself. So does that make sense in terms of how we're going to now incorporate this full dam removal?
I mean, I think maybe the non-technical of us, I certainly have a lot of questions about how does it work, of understanding how many weirs you would need and whether the rock ramp would work or not, but um, maybe that's a future conversation.
Yeah, so yeah, clearly what's going to happen is we have to take the dam out. I'll give you an example. Let's use this profile. I'm going to use the 95% exceedance. I'm going to show up the ABF. And like this is what we look at. Once we actually update the existing conditions model, and then we take the dam out of there, right? And that obviously is going to reflect existing ledge. We're going to basically things are going to pop out like, hey, what's a problem? Like looking at this, for instance, and I know this is maybe tough to put perspective, but this is the dam. This right here, this structure is Roosevelt Ave. Okay. So clearly you can see there's a big, I don't know if it's a scour hole, whatever it is, there's a depression in the channel bottom here. But like looking at this, okay, taking the dam out now, I can see, for instance, there's going to be pinch points in terms of flow depths. Like, okay, if I click on the existing channel bottom here, and that's 28, you can kind of see it popping up. And I look at what the proposed elevation would be, 28.96. I got 0.96 feet of flow, right? That's a little under a foot of flow. Is that sufficient for our target species? Not really, right? Is it good for herring? Sure, herring's a smaller fish. Generally, U.S. Fish and Wildlife guidelines are kind of like, 1.5 to 2 times the maximum body depth of the fish. So a foot here is probably good for herring, but shad is also a target species. Shad's a bigger fish. They generally are probably going to need about 18 inches of flow depth. So like this is a location where guess what? Okay, we might have to do some in-river improvements, right? That may be kind of just carving out a little bit of a low flow channel so that we can get the depth that we need. Same thing, as we move down here, clearly, fish aren't, they're not going to come up and make this jump, where the existing ledge is. So that's where throwing in, we'll say nature like, step pools may be required to kind of bridge that vertical gap so that the fish can actually make their way up. So that's kind of what that's how our analysis is going to proceed forward. So, I know there was questions about 95%, 5% flow. What does that actually mean? All of the fishways that we design are in accordance with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife NOAA guidelines. So that's kind of what we use here to assess for our fish passage criteria. Um, yeah, that's kind of what we're going to do, to help inform what sort of improvements we would need to potentially look at for a full removal to make it effective for fish passage. Clearly, velocities are another thing we will look at as well, right? A lot of times, I know I'll throw out the 6 feet per second. That's kind of the guideline that's used for the maximum burst speed, right, of the target species, that's the burst speed kind of river herring. So if we're putting in a nature like fishway, meaning we're going to have boulder weirs in there, and we have to notch it out a little bit so that we get flow depth for the fish to get through there, we got to make sure that our maximum flow velocity is less than 6 feet per second. Because if it's more than that, it may be a velocity barrier to the fish. So that kind of, I know it's a lot in there, but that's what we're going to do in order to figure out what is actually required in this river once we do a full removal.
Yeah, John, jump in.
Um, would the dam removal enhance this whole project to funders? Because it seems like they want to fund dam removal, so having one in the series of four, would that be an asset to finding funds?
I
John,
can,
go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say, Jason, go ahead.
yeah. I'll give that a shot. And then I didn't mention this when I introed myself there, but I do have to jump in a couple of minutes. But John, to your point, the answer is yes, by way of NOAA. I think that scores a lot of points. If we're going after NOAA funding, there it depends on the funding source as well, but generally speaking, NOAA likes dam removals. Like that's what they're generally after, and it scores you points in their applications. At least it used to. That being said, I think and this will just kind of tie into the other couple of things I wanted to say. So I really, I appreciate this extra work. I think this is something that is of interest, and I think we were inclined to just sort of look at it and say, it's going to be super challenging to do a full removal, and so let's just like not think about it. But in further discussion, seeing the questions from the CAC, it's clear that we need to understand this option better. And so I'm really enthusiastic about this extra work, trying to determine, we have a lot of conjecture about the bedrock. Maybe it's more than conjecture, but we think we know where it is, but now we'll know for sure, and then we'll kind of better understand that as an option. I can tell you, like all other things notwithstanding, in speaking with Phil Edwards from DEM's Division of Fish and Wildlife, run of river is always what we want. That's like our optimal. But I just want folks to temper their expectations, and there are a lot of things here, right? We've got road infrastructure, we've got all of the stuff Sean just talked about, and then we have even within DEM, wetlands permitting and things like that, if we start now putting a bunch of structures in the water, that changes the parameters of our interaction, with them a little bit. So it's just there's a lot of things that we need to think through, but we will think through them. So, I think that this is really a positive development uh, in the work here at Elizabeth Webbing. So, hopefully, I uh, answered John's question and prattled on a bit myself, but hopefully that helped.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Bruce?
So I guess the overall question is, so for me is really, as we sort of looking at all of these things, and you've already done some of this sort of preliminary work, what are we looking at for timelines so that we can actually look at it and know how we're proceeding and where we're going? Because it seems like, from Jason's conversation, it's a lengthy process. However, there could be an estimate of time um, that's spent on sort of looking at that. And I'm kind of curious on what that is. And then, the other part is based on either of the fish ladders that you're talking, whether it, be that's, the side slotted or the sort of natural, what's the maintenance costs? Like there's cost attributed to that. And then who picks that up and where does that get put? And how do we sort of plan for that? Because I think that those are the kinds of things that, if DEM is the owner and the state's the owner, then, there's a cost attributed to it. Or is it something that, we look at, so, do we look at in other creative ways to make sure that that's happening, to take care of that? Because the ultimate goal is that, we put all these things out there, but are we talking about those things? And then, I've had a sort of a quick preliminary conversation with, John Brown and the Narragansetts. And one of the things is how are we engaging them in this? Because, they and us are beneficiaries of these fish making our ways up. Because of course we're going to be looking at the opportunity to sort of, net them and go back to some traditional foods. So I think that there's things that we're not thinking about in this process because we're really looking at the science of it. So that's my question and curiosity.
I mean, the only thing I can say is we are considering maintenance in here, right? That's part of the whole decision matrix. We know that there's maintenance. Honestly, in my opinion, nothing is ever maintenance free. So these decisions that we're making, because I did see some of the CAC comments. Again, we're not making the decisions kind of, in a closed vacuum here. We have included DEM fisheries as part of this whole process. They understand that there's going to be maintenance to them. The vertical, like for instance, we'll use the two alternatives. We're looking at the vertical slot, right? That one's more of a structural fishway. There's definitely maintenance in that. I would say fishways now that are being or that exist in Rhode Island. Obviously, I don't think there is a vertical slot, but they do have a lot of denials, which are structural fishways. A little bit different, right? Denials are a little bit narrower. They have a lot of wooden baffles in them, whereas this vertical slot will be wider. It'll be 12 feet wide. It'll have, instead of wooden baffles, we'll say they'll have concrete sort of baffles. So it'll be the same sort of similar maintenance that's required. There's going to be, for instance, a trash rack at the upstream end of the system. We're going to limit flows through the system as well, so that'll hopefully keep out the bigger debris. Is there going to be sediment that's going to get in there? Sure, right? The water is going to carry some of that sediment. I would expect the sediment to build up a little bit in some of the recirculation zones where you have lower velocities really, within the pools. So yeah, there's going to be certainly some sediment maintenance that's required. And even if we do a bypass nature like fishway, which is going to, I'm going to call it a hybrid nature like fishway because I feel given the site constraints here that it's not a true nature like bypass. It's going to have vertical walls. Those vertical walls will be concrete, and we can talk a little bit. There's definitely surface treatments that can be done on those to make that look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. But regardless, they're going to be vertical walls. But then within that, we'll have more nature material. So instead of using concrete baffles, we'll use stone boulders like, boulder weirs. And then the pool bottoms can be, obviously it'll be a concrete floor, but on top of that, you'll have a more of a natural sort of substrate consisting of, what I would envision to be cobbles, little boulder cobble gravel mixture. But yeah, there's also that potential there that you're going to get some sediment that's going to be built up in there. So for sure, there's maintenance that's going to be included. DM is certainly aware of it, and that is a factor. That is a factor within our matrix table here of operations and maintenance for that. So, we've tried to rank them a little bit. Um, but yeah, there's definitely going to be maintenance. I'll say this, the idea, even with a vertical slot, is that you're not going to need big equipment to go in there and do the maintenance. A lot of it can be some of the concrete can be patched up. That's the theory. But yeah, there's always that potential that, a bigger repair is going to happen. So yeah, that's going to be on DEM to conduct that maintenance on that, and they're aware of that. I don't know, Jason,
Yeah,
or anybody from your group, fisheries can maybe speak a little bit to your thoughts on that as well.
yeah. So, Bruce, thanks for your comments. Um, and I'm going to talk about the maintenance aspect directly, but I just want to make sure that we don't miss your other questions, which were on the timeline, and then connecting with the Narragansett tribe as well. And so hopefully others can speak to those two things. But on the maintenance stuff, DEM is committed to that. We have a program that does that for our other fish passage around the state. And like Sean said, they've reviewed these and offered, their trade-off analysis of the different technologies and, what takes more work, what takes less. I'll offer one thought they had just so you can kind of understand the thought process from them. And that is, with the vertical slot, as Sean said, we don't have experience with those. We sort of understand the technology, but haven't worked with it directly in the state yet. And so it changes from the denials where we're having to kind of like there are these giant wooden baffles that you have to like move around, and it's hard. It's not easy. And I think that's kind of why that technology has sort of fallen out of favor. Plus, they're not as efficient. But that's they've factored all of this stuff in. They've given Fuss and O'Neill, their thoughts on how these might impact maintenance and operation. And so like with the vertical slot, it becomes instead of moving baffles around, it becomes controlling the flow, into the ladder. And that's something that we had concerns about. If it's like a couple times a year, not a problem. If it's like every day, that's a problem. We just don't have those resources. So they have that feedback from us that kind of factors into these trade-offs. So sorry, I rambled a little bit, but we're committed to the maintenance and operation. If there are, things we can do to partner, I think what's always helpful to us is if we don't have eyes up there every day. So if folks are up there and they give us reports, hey, there's some giant logs stuck in there, things like that, then we can react to them. So there's always a role for the community to play there. But, I think there's roles too for folks in counting fish and things of that nature as well. So we can talk about that as things develop, as we kind of, you know, continue to evolve on this particular site as, with respect to how the community gets involved here. But yeah, hopefully others can speak to the timeline and then the other connections that we want to make here. And I unfortunately have to drop. So nice to see everybody and have a good week.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
And so I know we're jumping around a bit too, and we have the full kind of list of questions, but I wonder if it makes sense with the time we have left to sort of summarize those in a few different pieces. So one was about considerations of full dam removal, and I think we've talked about that quite a bit. There are other elements of it that come up elsewhere, such as what Bruce mentioned around maintenance and also this idea of like long-term costs versus short-term costs, especially around that maintenance. But maybe it makes sense to to talk a bit more about the matrix of alternatives, explaining the velocities. That I think is less of a question and more of a, can you just help us understand this? Then there were a couple questions around climate change considerations.
Yeah, so what I did is I tried to write down, you can kind of see, I think you can still see on my screen here. I try to put down your questions and try put some responses down in preparation for this meeting. So I think the matrix I feel like is going to take a little bit. Maybe we can look at the velocities a little bit. So that go into the, I guess, question three, for instance. I think your first question was about recreational paddling upstream. We heard that at the last meeting. That was already removed from the matrix. So we're not making any sort of decision. Like that's not really a factor in our criteria upstream paddling. Um, what we're looking at, oops, sorry. When we talk about velocities, and maybe I can let me just see if I go to it's so much wording. Bottom line is that, again, this is the standard. We follow standard criteria, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NOAA. Like we've been designing fishways, I'd probably say since Lower Shannock Falls dam removal back in 2008 and 10 time frame. And yeah, we use U.S. Fish and Wildlife NOAA guideline to design these sort of fishways. So what they typically require is looking at what they call 95%, 50%, and then 5% exceedance flows. So those are specific to the upstream migration season. And actually what I can do, I mean, maybe this helps, maybe it makes it confusing, but like I'll give you an example. So this is, for instance, excuse me, our Excel or our data spreadsheet on how those flows are developed. So what you can kind of see is that we come in here and I'll go to this tab, gauge data. So we basically download, obviously Roosevelt Ave, there's a USGS gauge station. We download all of their daily data and we did it over the last 15 years. The reason why we don't pull older data than that is because we're trying to recognize that the climate is changing, right? Flows are a little bit different now than they were, let's say, back in 1960, 70. So what we do is we look at the last 15 years of data, we download all that from the gauge station, and then what that does is it basically, this spreadsheet was from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So what happens is you can see here, the gauge data we got was from January 1st, 09, and then obviously from October 14th of 25. So the other thing is we specify that upstream passage season. So based on the target species here, we're looking at April 1st to June 30th. Okay. And what that does is it takes all the data, all the daily data that we've downloaded, and specific, we'll say to the fish passage season, it basically spits out the 5%, the 50%, 95% exceedance flows. So what those are basically your lower flows that occurred during the upstream migration season, and the 5% exceedance are your higher flows. So, this is the O5, which is about 2,594 CFS. So during the upstream migration season, based on the last 15 years of data, this is about the highest flows that you're gonna see. Okay. So that's what we use as an upper limit for designing fish passage, assessing velocities, flow depths, etc. Then we look at the 95% exceedance, right? And that's your 274 CFS going through the river at this location. So that's what we also make sure that we can get adequate flow depths and velocities during the lower flows. That way we know that when we're looking at upstream passage, we're achieving the depths that are required for the fish species, as well as the flow velocities for that range of flows during the upstream migration season. And clearly we look at the 50% too, but bottom line is that's what the 95 and the 5% exceedance flows are. And that's what they use for. This is again standard criteria when you're designing, fishways. Does that at least kind of make sense? Or yeah, did I do justice in describing that?
I think so. I think I got some good notes down, but I'll ask others
Okay.
if you have questions. Okay.
Yeah, and you can kind of see like part of the other thing that this does too, that's just specific to the upstream migration season. The other thing we can pull from this data is we can look at, for instance, this is like overall, so forget just the period of flow between April 1st and June 30th, but based on that daily data, we can kind of pull out drought flows as well. Right. So that was one of the questions. That's how we relate it to resilience, we'll say. So we know, for instance, that 99.9% of the flows that occurred from whatever it was, 2009 to current day, that only 0.001, or 0.1% of those flows were less than 65. So that's what we would use as like an extreme low flow condition. So that's where we want to, I've also analyzed that for our alternatives. That's part of the flows we looked at too. That way we know we can get adequate flow depths, for instance, in the fishways, even during an extreme, drought. So our target species aren't moving through the river during that period, but I will say, you may have resident species that will be utilizing the river that can, so yeah, we're also meeting minimum depths that we need for even this extreme drought condition here. So that's the other thing that we can actually pull from this data as well. Um, yeah, it gives a nice little project flow curve, but you can see the 274 and 2594, your 5% exceedance here and 95% exceedance flows. But that's what we're essentially married to here. That's what when we analyze upstream passage, that's what we have to meet.
Yeah, and I don't think the question was saying that you're choosing the wrong things. I think the
Hmm.
question was just it's hard to understand what it
No,
means.
yeah, understood. That's fine. Yeah, for me, it's like been doing this so long. It's like I don't even think to really explain it. It's just like that's the way it is, But yeah, that's it there.
Thanks. And yeah, we can we can share these out with everybody afterwards so that they can kind of read through as well.
Yeah. Um, so that was the question, I think, on velocities. I know too, I know there was a comment made, and I kind of wanted to understand it a little bit. It said the Bradford Nature Lake Fishway was constructed incorrectly, and has higher flows, but fish still pass. Do we know what was incorrect about that? I'm just curious on that.
That it's not something that I'm familiar with. It's
Okay.
one of our other CAC members that wasn't able to attend this morning, but my understanding is that the baffles were supposed to be sort of on each side so that the fish could sort of jump from one to the other, but instead that they were kind of even, and so the fish had this sort of really high flow in the middle, but they were still
Okay.
able to get through.
Okay. Yeah, because all right, I guess that's helpful to know, like, because yeah, we certainly designed that years ago, and I mean they did. I know U.S. Fish and Wildlife they actually did tagging and they did performance
Yeah,
efficiency at that in 2018 and 2019, and I think that in 2018 at Bradford at least 60 they had 67% of the alewife getting in here, getting through there. In 2019 it went up to 100%. So I feel
I
like
think
that
that
the
was
fish,
that
yeah.
that was her point was even though it had higher flows than anticipated because
Hmm.
of I guess how it was initially actually constructed, fish were still able to get through here. So they would wait during those higher flows at the bottom pool and then when the flow is adequate, they could still get up. And so that was a question of if that's the case here, if we're sort of if we, I think in particular, if having dam removal in mind, if we're looking at full
Hmm.
dam removal and we see high flows, is it automatically like, nope, we can't do this? Or is it, well, there are high flows at certain times, but the fish will wait and then at those other
Okay.
flow scenarios, they'll get up? Or because of, I honestly don't understand how the rock ramp and the weirs work, but if they could get through the weirs, if that would, solve that also.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I think, Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong. I think Kate's concern was the low flow notches need to be staggered in the weirs.
That sounds right.
The low flow notches at Bradford are lined up. They were designed to be lined up. Um, is there any difference, Sean, between having the low flow notches staggered or lined up?
So I'm going to tell you this because clearly the first nature lake we did was at Kenyon, which is kind of a smaller version of Bradford. And during that we had staggered low flow notches, right? At Kenyon, the low flow notches, because there was less flow there, I think they were about something like 6 feet wide. At Bradford, they're 10 feet wide. Noah, who was part of the project team, they review our designs. They actually were the ones that recommended having them in line as opposed to staggered. And I think the reason I think is it creates a little bit more of a consistent flow jet through the pools. I can't tell you because I don't have the fish biological background to say they work better or not, but I can tell you John is right. Noah also reviewed the Bradford design, and that's their preference is to go um, straight instead of staggered. We just did one up in Marshfield, Mass, a smaller version of a nature lake, and we did do the staggered there. So, that was under Mass DMF review. So I'm not fully sure which one is better or not. I don't know if one potentially, holds a little bit more sediment than another. Um, I don't know, Greg Allen, you're on the line. Do you have any experience on, having those low flow notches in line or staggered? What's your experience on that?
Sure. Yeah. I know this is often a debate with fishways, whether it's a nature like fishway or a pool and weir fishway to have the notches in line or staggered. If they are in line, one of the concerns is that jet just shoots right at the next notch, and you get the flow kind of skipping, not really dissipating energy well within the pool. And so that's one reason with one reason to move that jet, slightly off to the side so it uses that full pool volume to dissipate the energy. And so that's one of the
Makes
benefits of
sense.
having them staggered. It'll better dissipate that energy. The eddies within the pools will be lower. And so I think it's whether they're in line or staggered, you just need to pay close attention to the hydraulics so you don't get them skipping from say from one notch to the next. I know from a behavior point of view, it's the thinking is, the fish ascend one notch and then they can head straight for the next notch and they don't get confused within the pool and and try to find where that next notch is. And so that's the thinking of having them in line. So um but I don't think there are studies that really show well, which is preferred. I think the important part is in terms of the hydraulics is you don't direct one jet directly at the next notch. So that's
So
Yeah.
I appreciate the conversation here. I think it's a little bit more technical than our group is really prepared to understand. I think it's sort of a next step of in a decision, but I think the question was more so around this if if our alternatives assessment around removal shows high flows, is that a no-go, or is it something where what we were sort of hearing about Bradford, I'm not sure if that's true, fish are sort of waiting for those appropriate flows and still able to pass even at the times that there are high flows.
So, I mean, the only I can say, Stephanie, is that I mean, our goal in designing this is that the fish get through these weirs. The notches are designed so that the velocities are conducive to passage, the depths of flow are conducive to passage. I mean, again, that's with looking at the flows from the 5% to the 95%. We don't design fish passage to consider flood flows, right? The idea is that fish are going to hang tight during flood flows, right? They're just too great. They're not going to pass. So generally, what they'll do is they'll sit there and then they'll wait till the time till the flows subside, and then they'll make their way up. So I mean, I think in this case, yeah, I mean, I think you guys have seen Army Corps' previous study, and they looked at a full dam removal, and they looked at putting in they called it a rock ramp right at the time, which is more of a straight shot down, right, with some roughness from the boulders and whatnot in there. So that's probably what I anticipate here, especially from looking at that quick change in profile between just ripping that dam out of there, seeing what that does. They're definitely going to need fish are going to need something here, right? They're not going to be able to make that jump over the ledge, unless for some reason there is some opening in the ledge that can be used as a notch, but let's just assume no right now. So they're going to definitely need, we're going to need to help them up there over that natural ledge. So I think we'll design that in accordance with the guidelines. We'll look at the higher flows during the upstream migration season, the lower flows, and make sure that whatever we're designing is conducive, to passage for that species.
Thanks. And I know that was something else that came up was, okay, well, we know that fish have passed through here before, so why can't they do that now? And there was a conversation around, we've constructed all these other dams and the elevations of the river have changed. And but also that's a really good point. We don't necessarily know if there's a notch within the existing bedrock that fish are able to pass.
Right. Right.
Or
We don't know that. And, it's a tough question because, I mean, obviously that's always the thing, right? Oh, yeah, prior to man, impacting the river, the fish theoretically got up there. I mean, unfortunately, I wasn't alive at that period, so it's tough to say. And sometimes other things happen through the course of history that might, impact it. Like, for instance, I think the dam was built before the bridge, Roosevelt Bridge. So I mean, you know what I mean? So like at one point, the fish, there's been changes in the river that have occurred. So yeah, I can't fully say that, once we just take this out, the fish are going to make it up there. So that's what, I mean, that's kind of what the point of what we're doing. We'll try and assess ledge as best as we can to say, is that still the case? If we just remove the man-made section, can fish get up there, or have other things occurred throughout the course of history in that river, such as the construction of that bridge, which I think was in the bridge in 1905, but it's like that, can they still get through there? And that's part of what I'm finding right now, is that the bridge is also going to potentially be a velocity barrier, depending on the extent that we actually lower that dam itself. Because obviously the bridge has restricted flow through the river at that particular location. So that's another part of what we're looking at right now too.
so with our last 10 minutes or so, does it make sense to go through what the alternatives scenario or that alternative matrix looks like?
We can. You
And
want to do that?
I was just going to ask other members if they have other things that they want to discuss. Okay. I did want to highlight one thing
Hmm.
quickly on the alternatives and discussion of maintenance, because I know we had said previously maintenance is of course a concern, and if we can't maintain it, we don't really want to build it. And there's a consideration of how much maintenance is included. I think maybe there was some confusion that we'd heard before that a Nature Lake Fishway had, excuse me, a Nature Lake Fishway had higher maintenance or concerns about maintenance. But actually, in our last conversation, Nature Lake Fishways are the least maintenance and they do naturally sort of clean themselves with higher flows. So that's a big differentiation that I just wanted to highlight.
Right, and you can see that here in the table there. That table's taken from our report too. So I mean, yeah, we're showing Nature Lake as having a lower maintenance needs than the vertical slot. I think the thing that's important to understand here, um, and what I'm gonna do, I don't need to show the whole thing, but I think it's really important to understand. Like I would say that this is true. We just have to realize that what we're putting in here is also a little bit, I would say, of a hybrid nature like Fishway. Sorry, hold on. Can you guys hear anything? Okay. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So this is a nature like Fishway in New York that currently exists, and it's kind of what I would envision here a little bit. It's somewhat of a hybrid nature like Fishway. So meaning that there are some harder components to it, like the concrete walls on the sides are going to be vertical. There's not enough room to actually on our site to slope up. For instance, at like 2 to 1, it's not going to happen. So this is why in our case, our nature like is a little bit of a hybrid. So I do think there's going to be there's going to be a little bit more maintenance needs for this, our hybrid nature like, than a typical nature like. So I wanted to put that, think it's important. And we don't have to watch this whole video, but I think just to give you guys an idea, like, here, you can see you have the boulder weirs in there, so it's natural in that regard. But the sides are probably going to be harder concrete. So I mean, is the chances that you're going to need to, like I said, fix maybe the walls if there's some spalling that occurs? Sure, maybe. Again, debris is always an issue, no matter what type of fish way, getting through there. But we do have trash racks on the upstream end to hopefully limit the larger debris from getting in here and causing, big disruption. But this is kind of what I want to envision for this site, and nature like would be roughly similar to. All right, I'm gonna stop it there. But yeah, that's I thought that was important to, might help a little bit to kind of visualize it for you guys too.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think pictures are definitely helpful. Thanks.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like I think normally we would anticipate that the nature like will be a little bit lower in terms of maintenance needs, but here there's gonna be some upkeep. And again, that was one of your questions. You can see some of the photos in there just while we're talking about it, about potential to instead of having just a solid concrete look here, for either alternative, like that. For instance, the photo on the downstream right, that was actually from Horseshoe Falls Dam, and I'll zoom into it here, but. SHPO was involved there. This was a historic register area. So any concrete walls that we had proposed that were visible, we had to actually form line them. So they're concrete, they're just form lined, and then they're stained to match the kind of historic color of the masonry in that area. So that's certainly an option in this case, especially knowing that we're within a national or register historic district here.
Bruce?
So, the photo you showed, it's like, the boulders in the middle, that's not really aware. Those are just sort of like barriers.
Well,
Um,
we call them boulder weirs. Yeah.
okay. Because I'm
Yeah.
because I'm thinking about, because I've looked at a lot of historical wares that we've found in different parts of Massachusetts, and it's like
Hmm.
the ware is really about sort of creating the pools to sort of
Correct.
keep them within. Those are just sort of like more of a barrier to give them a place to sort of like to the flow, to control the flow.
So let's say yes, the boulder weir configuration and that like that's not what we're proposing. What we're
Okay.
actually proposing more of a solid with a 5 foot wide notch. That's probably 2.5, 33 inches deep, we'll say. So it's a little bit more than 2.5 feet. So yeah, I agree. Like that's not fully what we'd propose here for weirs, but essentially they're kind of doing the same thing, right? In the sense that instead of having one notch opening, that one which we're looking at had multiple, right? Because they had the boulders, but they had like 18-inch openings, we'll say, between multiple boulders. So they're still kind of holding back flow a little bit to help create the pools and then because there are hydraulic drops across each one of them. But yeah, our boulder weirs that we'd envision here would not be exactly like those.
Yeah, I always just think about that because in language, it's like, we built wares very specifically to pool the fish in for easy fishing. I mean,
Hmm.
that's really what that's about. And then when the water, when we wanted the water level to drop after we took what we took, we let them go through that. So it was just the opposite. So like, the concept of sort of calling it a ware, I just, I'm a language guy. So it's like when I start to think about that,
Yeah,
it's
I hear
like
you.
it really kind of like goes sort of opposite of what the sort of the thought of a ware.
Understood. Understood.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's the only reason I was asking about it. So
Yeah, so this kind of shows a little bit more of what we would have here, which is more to what you're speaking of, where it's more of a solid, we have boulders creating more of a solid weir, and then
gotcha.
we have that internal notch in here.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's one of my downfalls is I grew up with my grandparents didn't speak very good English, so I was taught not to understand the intent of what they're saying, not focus on the actual words. But I get it. That's not very good when you're trying to explain things. So that, yeah, I appreciate it. Stephanie, do you want to go back on the
The alternatives
yeah,
for
the
the
matrix?
matrix.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull this up in Excel instead. It's the same matrix pretty much, but so I guess you know, looking specifically at your question, it was in relation to the criteria weighting. So this was kind of our first cut at kind of figuring out what is most important to the project. What you can kind of see is we gave 10 weightings, right, to anything related to fish passage. That to us was very important. We did give a 7 rating to the minimizing construction costs, right? So costs were another factor that we kind of weighted a little bit higher. We didn't really put much focus on the hydropower facility operations, right? We gave that a 1, which is pretty minimal. Um, 7, we also gave to community engagement, accessibility, recreational benefits. So kind of the opportunity to use this site now more so for on-site open space. Because you know, one of the things that we did come across in reviewing kind of the let's see, I might be screwing up this word, but kind of a preservation plan for that whole river corridor there, because it is kind of a national historic register area, was, you know, enhancing views to the river, kind of creating more recreational space, similar to that overlook park that's, I think, on the upstream side of Roosevelt Ave. So we kind of gave that aspect a 7. Obviously, adaptability to future conditions from climate change, we gave that a higher rating, right? You guys expressed concern about that too. So we kind of bumped that up to a 10. And then obviously the Roosevelt Ave Bridge, which is also a historic structure too. We wanted to, you know, we gave that a 7 in terms of, you know, minimizing or considering that in the decision in terms of, you know, are we going to create additional erosion there? We're going to need to do scour countermeasures at that bridge location. And then lastly, we gave a 7 to what John was referring to earlier as that sound curtain, right? One of the things is that the adjacent residential complex, the property owner, you know, the concern was that right now the drop in the water levels from the dam, they adequately block out sound from 95. So that's one thing we also looked at a little bit. Well, you know, clearly in, you know, the lower you drop that dam, that, you know, there's going to be a little bit less sound. Um, the benefit that we have here is that there's still going to be some form of natural fall, so there's always going to be sound going over this river, even if you did like essentially a full man-made removal of the dam. And I think in the study that was done by Army Corps, they basically said like, hey, you could take out all the man-made portion of it, and it's still going to adequately block out the sound from 95. So that was a good thing for the project. That leaves us more open to, hey, guess what? We can take most of this dam out. And I think that if we fully take the man-made portion of the dam out, we're still going to need to potentially, you know, like we were talking about, put in some form of a weir system, right? Boulder weirs that, you know, and that's going to create sound as well, I think too. So, you know, but anyway, the point being is that we gave this the 7 to sound. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on the criteria weightings themselves. Would you modify them?
I mean, I know that you only gave it a 1, but my hydro thought is that it shouldn't be in there at all because if if DEM isn't allowing hydro to happen, it's not an issue. And if for some reason FERC comes down and circumvents and says, nope, we're superseding your authority, and there's a lot of legal battle years down the road, I would imagine that this did happen, then that owner would be you know, required to provide fish passage. So it wouldn't really matter what we were putting together. So in my opinion, that shouldn't necessarily be a criteria. I'm, you know, not the final decision maker here, but
No, it's fine. Like you know, what I can do is I can zero that out or remove it. Like I just zeroed it out for now, so now it doesn't matter what the rating is in there. It doesn't affect the overall. I think what it was is when we had a meeting in September with DEM, McNamee, and TNC, we're like, okay, we'll just, you know, there is that potential that the hydropower does come, but you're absolutely right. They would be required to provide fish passage. They even, I mean, if you read their FERC app, they even would provide downstream portage too for you. So
yeah.
There you go. Yeah, but
Yeah.
yep, I'm fine. I'm fine. I mean, obviously, if anybody else on the team has a problem with zeroing that out, John, I don't know if you do, but
Yeah.
Fine with me.
okay.
And then again, I'm very open if others want to jump in here. My other thoughts are around, um, I know you have like minimized construction costs, but there isn't necessarily a consideration of what are the long-term costs. And so again, I'm seeing dam removal as having, excuse me, dam removal as having maybe a high construction cost, but a low maintenance cost of in the future, you don't really have to do anything necessarily,
Okay,
depending
so
on what it is that's constructed.
we do have a column, minimize
Okay.
future operation and
Oh,
maintenance
okay.
burn
Yep.
and life cycle. So yeah, it's a good point. Maybe I got up that to 7, the same as like upping the cost, right? That should also be critical. Okay.
Kevin?
The scouring score, and impact on upstream
Yeah.
infrastructure. Was that prior to knowing how bad that scour pool or whatever that is that you showed in your model? That really large dip that's already existing just downstream from where
No,
you are.
no. I mean, clearly that's factored into the model that hole that exists, but let me see if I can maybe like I'll give you an example. I don't know. Let me hold on. I can probably zoom in and we don't have to get lost in the numbers, but this just helps me kind of illustrate some of the what we're seeing. So like under existing conditions right now, I'll use the flood flows, right? The 10-year velocity going through there, the maximum through Roosevelt's about 7.26. The 50-year was 10.12, and then the 100 years 11.53, right? So you can see that a 10-year of 7.26, if as we start to lower that dam, as you'd expect, the velocities are going to start to go up. So even with like so going up to like a 2 foot removal, well, that velocity increases 726 to 879. You know, you go to a 4 foot removal, it goes up to 1075. You go to a 5 foot removal, 1128. And then again, just quickly taking the dam out, not saying this is a fully vetted out full removal, but it goes up to 11 and a half, right? So you know, you have an increase of about 4 feet per second going through there for a 10-year. For the 50-year, it's going up from 10.1 up to about 11.87. Not that significant, in my opinion, of an increase. The 100 years going from 11 and a half to 12.6. Um, so it's just a matter of though, you know, for instance, the existing 100 year, now if you do a full removal, that's going to relate to frequency and about a 10-year storm now if we fully take the dam out. So, you know, you're going to see those flows going through there now more frequently than previous before. So that's where we'll just have to go in and look at the scour potential. So it's more of the potential of scour. So that's kind of how we looked at it at this concept stage, 30% stage is, you know, what's the potential that scour could be an issue. I can tell you this, in looking at the ride-out bridge drawings for the Roosevelt Bridge, the abutments are founded on ledge, right? So I'm not worried about the bridge like washing away. I don't think that's ever going to be possible because of it's founded on ledge. But you then have a couple feet layer of or more of actual substrate material that's in there. Um, they have installed, DOT has installed scour countermeasures. They call it Class C riprap, which is a really old term classification for it, which I think is probably about R5 riprap now. So they have had some scour concerns on one of the abutments. I forget which one exactly. So, you know, there is some potential that we do need to look at scour under the Roosevelt Bridge, but this gives you a rough idea. And the other thing, which Stephanie goes a little bit what we are talking about velocity barriers for fish. What you can kind of see is that right now for the fish passage flows, the flows vary from zero point 0.4 feet per second to 2.58 feet per second, right? Fish can get through there, not a problem. Like for instance, the alewife is 6 feet per second. So you can kind of see what I highlighted in red, where we start to now, where that spillway lowering starts to increase the potential that that bridge would become a velocity barrier for fish moving upstream. So anyway, I know we're not supposed to be talking about that now, but that's kind of what th those are the things that we're looking at a little bit when we say scour potential under Roosevelt Ave.
So it's a balance of including, yes, it might affect the bridge, and maybe there's something that we can do to protect the bridge, and that's not necessarily the problem. But if the velocity is too high for fish to be able to pass, we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, it's not, yeah, it just means that now we're gonna have to invest some money to make passage under Roosevelt Ave conducive. Right. So it may be a little bit more than just, hey, we're gonna make this, we're gonna throw in some scour countermeasures. We may actually have to shape out a little bit of a channel there and make sure it's kind of stays there, right? So that that increases maybe the cross-sectional area of flow so that the velocities are conducive to passage for the fish passage flows. Yeah. So that's kind of what we're seeing. Any drop in the spillway likely of more than 2.75 feet. I think that potential exists that we may need to look at doing something under the bridge.
Which seems like a lot to include in one number there.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Okay. And I put a note in the chat. I know we're very over our time, so I'm sorry everybody for that, but I appreciate you taking the time to go through this and answer our questions.
No, no, it's fine. I mean, I think the purpose of this is to kind of get your feedback too. So we're going to zero out the impacts to the hydropower. I'm going to bump up the criteria weighting for O&M to 7. And yeah, okay. So that's where we kind of stand at this point.
Are there other thoughts from folks? The only other thing that I thought of, which is probably my naivety, but I know things are a little bit different between Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And Massachusetts, where it's still hard to permit restoration projects, but it's getting a little easier. I think Rhode Island, it's a bit tougher still, but I would hate for something to be chosen as this is the desired alternative, but because it's harder to permit, we don't want to do it. I feel like we should just like pick that battle and fight for a, something that's a good restoration project on the Blackstone, which is really well deserving and over deserving of fish passage and restoration. So I don't love the first one
Hmm.
of wetland resources, but again, I think it's a little bit of a balance. I hope the regulatory climate changes so that this becomes easier and it doesn't have to just say like we're going to kill the project because of it, but I know it is a consideration now. So I would maybe ask others what your thoughts are, and I don't know, not to put you on the spot, Darcy, or if anyone else wants to have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think my sense would be to keep it as a consideration for existing conditions, right? Assuming that this kind of moves forward in the next couple of years, we're looking at permitting. We don't know if we're going to be able to talk with DEM about potential changes in that time frame or not, or make those changes. So I think it makes sense to keep it within the framework so that we understand what it would look like. But I think, in the end, I think, Sean, my sense is that we'll be able to keep kind of drilling into these and have a few of these alternatives tables where we say, well, okay, what if we de-weighted this a little bit more? What would it look like if we thought that, wetlands permitting, we wanted that to be less of a concern in terms of which alternative we chose. And so my sense is that what I would like to see is, each alternative with, I guess, with and without that weighting in a way.
Hmm.
If that's something that you would normally do for a project like this.
That makes sense. Just to say, is this
Yep.
a deciding factor, or does it not really matter that much? Does it not change
So
the outcome?
I just zeroed these out right now. Okay. And you can kind of see it's not really changing the outcome. Uh,
Okay.
I mean, to be fully transparent, I feel that right now the weightings that I'm seeing overall is or the scoring, it could go either way. It could go with a nature like or go with a vertical slot. I feel like, a lot of the research that I've done, and just speaking from fish passage standpoint, efficiencies, I feel like the vertical slot, and when I say vertical slot, I don't, there's been advances in vertical slot design since, like, I know that there's a paper out there from I think Bunt, and that's one paper that U.S. Fish and Wildlife recommends in terms of efficiencies, but that was back in like 20, it was a while ago, 2012 maybe. So there's been advances in these vertical slot designs. So I think they're relatively efficient here. I think they're comparable to what we'd be proposing on this site, which is a hybrid nature like fishway. And so it's kind of like, in my opinion, if somebody had a strong opinion, they want a vertical slot here or nature like, it'd be like, okay, I think they're gonna provide relatively similar efficiencies for passage here. I think that the biggest thing, in my opinion, that we need to look at moving forward a little bit is the entrance location of the fishway. We got to make sure that wherever we're putting this entrance, that's the downstream entrance to the fishway, and I can pull it up, just in a graphic here, and I'm just gonna pick this one, right? But like this is the entrance, for instance, I'm talking about for a nature like being here. We need to, because this is not on the immediate downstream side of the dam, we want to make sure that the fish can actually find this. I think that to me is probably the biggest thing we want to make sure that we nail down. This location, I can tell you, was something that we put together through discussions with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Greg Allen, who's on the line as well. So this is an ideal location, but I mean, for instance, for Main Street, the location of that fishway was determined from actual telemetry tagging of the fish. So we knew kind of where they were hanging out downstream. So, moving forward, that would kind of be nice to be able to either do some form of I'll say a 3D modeling of how because it's interesting right now, right? How the flows kind of come over this dam. This is not a dam that just spans directly across the river. You have flow coming over this way. You have flow coming over from this side as well. So it's a lot of turbulent zones, that's being created right now. So I think that's the biggest thing to this. But I guess, yeah, short answer is, I mean, I think we're so close with the ratings with the vertical slot or nature like honestly, I'm not sure there's one over the other. I know, Greg, can you quickly just either agree or give us your thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. 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 Vertical slot fishways, they're kind of preferred for shad and herring. They provide greater capacity and they provide a good water depth for shad. Shad don't do well with pool and weir type fishways. The Nature Lake Fishway here, yeah, I would say they're comparable, but it really comes down to how it's designed. As Sean mentioned before, this is more of a hybrid technical fishway design. It has vertical walls, so how you create those pools within that fishway is very important. But in terms of performance, one over the other, I think they're comparable. That's my opinion in terms of shad and herring passage. And like you said, Sean, what's really important about this site, where it's kind of congested and narrow part of the river, the dam, getting that entrance location right. I think we're probably close to where you're showing it now on the screen, but whether it's a nature lake fishway or vertical slot fishway, the entrance and the configuration is pretty important. That's our uh, best professional judgment just looking at aerials, but modeling would certainly benefit the design there and where and how that should be configured.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so Darcy, that's a little bit more than you asked, but yeah, your point of the, kind of if we can look at the criteria weighting with and without the permitting, again, I don't think it's going to really change the overall conclusion. They're all going to be pretty close right now. We're seeing the vertical slot kind of edging out that nature like just by a hair.
Thanks. That's definitely helpful.
And I think a lot of these thoughts are also, okay, if we're adding in this other alternative of full removal, how is that going to rank in comparison to all of these others?
Correct. And like I said, as part of this second phase, that's what we're gonna take the same table and then we're going to update that table with the full dam removal option with likely an in-river in-river nature light because that's pretty much what I anticipate we're gonna need here.
So the last thing I'll maybe mention is actually two things. One is in cultural resources. I know you talk about like archaeological resources, but not
Hmm.
necessarily these like cultural co-benefits. And I would, look to Bruce's comments earlier, or if he has anything else to add of, preferences of tribes and the opportunity of, um, you know, incorporating more culturally appropriate, I guess, maybe ways to pass fish of sort of restoring that natural fish passage versus constructing something. I don't know if that's a consideration. Um, and then the last thing was in the last part of the blue, I know you have like aesthetics, upstream
Yeah.
communities, and sound curtain. I know
Yep.
that the sound curtain is really important. And last time we had a conversation with Jason, he mentioned when he talked to um I'm blanking on his name, I'm sorry. When he talked to the owner, Louis, yep.
Lewis, yep. Yep.
Yeah. He said sound is important, but it really is more of the whole picture of aesthetics, sound, recreation, sort of what are the benefits to that community. So I'm not sure if sound necessarily should be a higher ranking than the other sort of aesthetic and recreational. Um, and I the effect to upstream wetland communities, is that sort of the looking at the does that include things like, improved water quality and lower temperatures and, diverse macroinvertebrates, things that dam removal would potentially score higher in? What's
So
a
you know what? It does not right now. All that really looks on is direct kind of impacts to the wetlands because we had a slide in here. So your point is taken on that. In terms of it's basically yeah. I guess if I was to update that, it would say adjacent upstream wetland community. So not the actual river itself, but you're right. There's going to be greater benefits in terms of all those things that you mentioned. The greater the dam removal. The greater the spillway lowering, I should say. Yeah.
right? And similarly around funding, I think it was Kevin or John maybe that mentioned this earlier of often dam removal scores higher in funding sources like NOAA. So should that be a consideration of this project is just um what's the word? Uh this project would be potentially easier to fund
Hmm.
as a consideration. And I think that's actually all of my comments. I can stop
No,
that.
that's fine. No, that's good. I'll look into that one. The funding thing is a little bit out of what I generally do. I'm more of on the design side, so I can talk to Nils a little bit about that. But I don't disagree in your point. I wrote it down here, so we can take a look at modifying this table a little bit. So just to close it out, I guess the sound recreation. What I can do is I can either knock that down to a 5, right? Or basically, make sure or it's actually similar to the community engagement because I think one of the things you talked about a little bit was not only the sound curtain but recreational opportunities, right? Is so as long as they're either the same or and I can knock it down, I think that's critical. And then I think what I will do is look at this column a little bit more closely, minimizing effects to upstream wetland communities and try and factor in those additional things that are going to improve it. I mean, let's all be honest. I mean, this is not the cleanest of rivers. There's a lot of water quality designations. Some of the soils that we found are, obviously there's definitely hits on all those. So it's not the cleanest of rivers, but yes. In terms of, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and things like that, getting things moving a little bit more, that for sure would be a benefit to lowering that spillway, definitely. And I'll make sure that we update that to include that. Um,
Regarding funding, both
mhm.
NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service funding scores higher whenever dam removal or partial dam removal is in the project.
Which we theoretically have, regardless, right? We're doing a partial removal. If anything, it's, I probably would say a 2.75, 2 to 2.75 foot would be the minimum lowering. So right there is a partial removal. So, if the full removal works out being more advantageous, then I think that's only going to improve the funding.
Yeah, and
So
I
what,
think
oh
go
yeah, I
ahead.
was just going to say, John, so just to kind of finish that though, knowing that we're going to either do partial or full, would you agree then that the full removal is going to have a higher score for funding than the
It
partial?
absolutely
Okay.
it would you're really potentially looking at restoring the main channel of the river.
And I think it was telling hearing from Phil the other day, Phil said from Fish and Wildlife's perspective, the first thing you always look at is, yeah, our preference would be full dam removal and fish getting through in the river channel. That's our number one. But, maybe that's possible, maybe that's not. But I think that we have to come at it with that mentality of our reviewers for any of these projects will be thinking the same thing. And so we have to show them whatever alternative we've come up with. We said, yes, we agree. We should look at that full channel restoration, but we couldn't do it because XYZ, or
Absolutely.
we could do partial because XYZ. So I think all of this is really helpful for us to have. I know it seems like we're kind of going backwards to go forwards, but whatever we come up with, I think that we'll have a more solid product in the end because we'll be able to back up our claim of whatever our preferred alternative is. We really went through all the steps and we can prove to you that this is what's best, if that
I
makes sense.
I would throw in also that we have a list of current alternatives, and we're going to add to those list of current alternatives with dam removal and the nature-like fish passage. And then we take a look at this algorithm or this spreadsheet, and we pick the preferred alternative. The one that we're going to have the consultant take the 60% design and permitting. The issue with this, though, is that we really need to address the covenant in the deed and the ability to negotiate with Mr. Yip. And it may require, I think, depending upon how much funding we have in the budget and what we're going to do, the development of a rendering of what a nature-like fishway will look like at this location. So he clearly understands by looking at a picture what the intent is. I think just a mere description and all of the engineering going along with schematics could be enhanced with the development of better visual aids so that he sees that this is clearly an upgrade to this site completely. So I think that needs to be looked at in the future as far as the budget is concerned for this next phase two.
Mm-hmm.
John, do you think that having members and organizations from the CAC having a conversation with Mr. Yip and talking about the future potential investments, or because I know that he's not even thinking just that parcel alone, but going upstream and downstream a little
That's
bit.
right.
When
That's
it's
right.
the organizations that are on these board on this committee that are the ones that are also pushing for the same things of investment
Right.
on those parcels of
Right
that
now,
we understand is harder for DEM to do because when you bring
yeah.
in the ADA of all of that, it can become a mess. So would having these organizations talking to them and saying, yes, we want this, but we also want to improve the site for other recreational purposes and showing the support as well.
Absolutely. I think right now the portal is Jason. He's established a relationship with him. And I think this is something that, goes through Jason to say, listen, can we enhance this portal? Can we enhance the negotiations and the discussions with him by looking at our group endorsing this? But we really need we really need to figure out the product itself first. I think we really need to see, is this feasible? What are the issues? What's going to happen? What's involved? And understanding that, then again, just a way to enhance this visually so that, a perhaps a meeting can be set up with him to come forward and say, listen, this is the direction we want to go in. We're going to need that before we take this to 60% design. Um, that's clearly on the list of the pathway forward for this.
Yeah, and I think that the amount of work that organizations have already put in on parcels around there, like John with the Watershed Council with their Granite Park restoration efforts and things of that sort. I think that there's a track record there of people investing in this area, trying to bring it up to a more welcoming space instead of just slopes that go to the river that are full of trash. Um, I'm not sure. Like you're saying, I think that the right way is through Jason, but it might be two separate conversations that do have a connecting link. But while all of the discussion about what's going on with the dam goes on, I think also the discussions of how we can improve that site and the land around it could happen together.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's a good point. I've tried to capture some of this in the notes, so please feel free to add your own comments in there, guys. And a logistical note here so we had this meeting today because I know, Fussin O'Neill, you had an internal deadline that we had to have this conversation
Hmm.
before
Hmm.
our typical CAC meeting. But we still technically have that on the books for this Thursday. I feel like we went through a lot today, so we don't necessarily need that meeting on Thursday. Would folks agree with that? Okay, I'm
Yeah, I'd
seeing
say
some.
unless Matt has any updates on any of the PRA stuff.
No, no updates on that front.
Yeah, I wouldn't anticipate knowing anything maybe until next month at the earliest, I think is what I heard from them. Yeah, so let's hold off on this Thursday's meeting and then um our next meeting will be, sorry, I'm gonna pull it up somewhere. February 19th, and we'll go back to our typical in-person and on Zoom 9:30 Thursday, third Thursday.
Okay. And Stephanie, one question you guys, I think you had too, was just in relation to that portage.
Yes.
It was, can the downstream recreation access easement be used for portage below the dam and include stone steps? So I just have a graphic that kind of shows the easement right from the roadway in orange, and then that leads to the green. So I think it's tough. It's going to my feel is that it's going to be tough to fit something in here. I think there's a possibility to do that. And what I did is I kind of just drew a sketch on here. This kind of shows like a potential portage path, going down. And this is in the green, for instance, kicking around, going down. And this does meet ADA requirements because I think, you know, my experience with this is that if we put in a portage that doesn't accommodate all users, you could potentially run into some trouble there. So, this portage here in green kind of shows laying it out and almost putting the downstream portage, almost fitting that in the downstream raceway channel and almost taking the configuration that we had in our alternative three, right, which was keeping the Fishway and River, and almost kind of morphing that into somewhere between, keeping it in the river a little bit, and but then still running it in the upstream side of the Raceway channel. So it's something to consider moving forward. But I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. This wasn't like a super. I didn't spend like a whole bunch of time on
Sure.
that, but I think in trying to answer your question, that's my feel is that we should want to try and make this ADA accessible based on what I've seen from National Park Service and their recommendations. We ran into a problem up in some Massachusetts project, but where we did portage, even though they don't have portage now, we added one on the upstream side. Or we had one on the downstream side, but not on the upstream side because there really wasn't much space to do that. And essentially, what we had to do is apply for a waiver from Mass DOT on that one for why we're not providing it. So my answer right now is if we can accommodate all users, making it ADA, that's what we want to do. And I think it's possible to fit in there. It's just if we were to do a 22-foot wide nature like Fishway in here, there's not a lot of space to do that. But maybe there's an opportunity if we go with a vertical slot too, which is only 11 feet wide. Maybe we can fit both in there, you know. So I want to just throw that out there.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a good point that, in all cases, we would prefer ADA accessibility. I think that question was more so of, can this be a temporary fix? Because right now it's really challenging. And so is there a short-term, easier, something we can do to make this safer over the next 5 years or over the next 2 years
Hmm.
for our recreational kayakers to be able to portage this dam, um, that maybe doesn't meet ADA accessibility, but provides benefits for now until we can figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a bigger question. And I think the answer is we need to have that conversation outside of DEM and their ownership and purview because that becomes more complicated when it's state owned. And so I think advocacy groups just need to work with Mr. Yip about figuring
Yes.
out what makes sense there because I know Friends of the Blackstone, for instance, has installed numerous just stone steps down to the river, which is like the best we have on the Blackstone. That's amazing. When we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
stone
Yeah.
steps, like wow. Low expectations here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I have to say it because I don't want to get us
sure,
in trouble.
absolutely. Yeah.
I've seen some actually Larissa Park in East Providence where they put whatever it was, they put stairs in there and then they had to shut the stair, even though it was brand new stairs they put in, that's what was there now. They had to shut them down because there was no ADA access. So I guess I've seen it go both ways, and I just have to
Hmm.
be careful as the designer on record, we don't get in trouble by
Right.
ADA for doing something that we shouldn't. But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's tight. It's a big change in vertical distance to get down to the bottom. So
Yep. Okay. So, thank you again for spending so much time. I'm sorry that this went way over everybody. We do have some notes. I'll send those out. We'll cancel Thursday's meeting. And then, Sean, if you can just share everything, if you feel comfortable sharing this with us, just so I can send that out to everybody and make sure that anyone who missed it has the answers. Or I
mhm.
know there were a lot of things that we didn't get into specifics that it seems like you've thought out that we can review. That would be helpful.
Yeah, I can definitely give you these CAC 1, 2, and 3 slides. I would just, in terms of the entire presentation, I feel like I haven't received full feedback yet from DEM on that, and that's what I was hoping to get before I sent to you guys. So, I can check with DEM and TNC and see how they feel about sending the entire updated presentation. But if they're okay with me sending it, I certainly will. At minimum, I'll definitely send you our responses to your questions.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
And I'll share that out. And I think that you sent me the alternatives matrix as
I
well that I
sent you that
will
too. Yeah.
also
Yep.
send out. And I know we've discussed that in more detail now of making some modifications.
Yeah, and I'm okay too. If you feel like updating it yourself and shooting it over, I mean, I can definitely look at it that way too. But otherwise, I've taken the notes in terms of how you guys think we should update it, and I'm happy to do that.
Great. Well, this is recorded as well, so that'll help all of us for our notes. I'll send that out. thank you again for spending so much time. I'm so sorry that we went really over. But anything else? Okay. Happy Monday, folks. We'll see you February 19th.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.